Welcome to the reading and discussion, The Political Life of the Novel, organized and hosted by Literatures of Annihilation, Exile, and Resistance, and led by Professor Azareen van der Vliet Oloomi. I'm Mark Sanders, the director of the Initiative on Race and Resilience, and in my capacity as director, I can speak for the IRR community in saying that we are overjoyed to be able to provide this space, the Sojourner Truth Commons, for 2 days of intensive reflection on the role of literary art in our understanding of capital P politics, as well as the politics of race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexuality, empire, and so much more. In the wake of Tuesday's elections here in the U.S. and in the context of the ongoing war in Gaza, these are very charged topics we are compelled to address as a community in the pursuit of truth and social justice. After the reading, we will open the floor for questions and discussion that may produce moments of sharp disagreement. Disagreement is an integral part of critical discussion, but in order to have a productive discussion, we are required to address our interlocutors with the courtesy and respect with which we would like to be addressed. No personal attacks will be tolerated. If your comments begin to devolve into incrimination and accusation, the microphone will be taken from you. And on that light note, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a wonderful colleague and an even closer friend, Professor van der Vliet Oloomi. Azareen van der Vliet Oloomi is an American novelist and nonfiction writer. She is the author of Call Me Zebra, named a Best Book of the Year by over 20 publications, and the winner of the 2019 PEN Faulkner Award, the John Gardner Award, and longlisted for the PEN Open Book Award. Her other novels include Savage Tongues and Fra Keeler, for which she received a Whiting Writers Award and a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 Award. She was the 2023-24 Carl and Lily Forsheimer Foundation Fiction Fellow at Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies at Harvard University, a recipient of fellowships from Fulbright, the Aspen Institute, and MacDowell. Her work has appeared in the Best American Short Stories, the Sewanee Review, the Yale Review, the New York Times, and the Paris Review, among other places. In 2020, she founded Literatures of Annihilation, Exile, and Resistance, a conversation series focused on the intersection of the arts and transformational migration. Born in Los Angeles, she spent her childhood in Iran, the United Arab Emirates, Spain, and speaks Farsi, Italian, and Spanish. She is the Dorothy G. Griffin College Professor of English at the University of Notre Dame. Now, I just cut and pasted all of that from the website. All of it is perfectly true, and all of it, I think, well represents her academic accomplishments, but it really pales in the face of who she is as a person. She's loving and she's brave, and we are so fortunate to have her as a part of this community. Thank you, Azareen, for all of the things that you do for us, and please join me in welcoming Professor van der Vliet Oloomi.
Mark has a way of making me cry every time. Thank you so much. So I'm going to speak for a little bit longer than I usually would because this is such a celebratory occasion for us. We've been running online since 2020 with our collaborators, some of whom are here in the room, Atalia, Allison, Mark, Francisco, and I'm very lucky to be in conversation with 3 of my favorite writers, so it's an honor, and I will take some time to properly introduce their novels that we're here to speak about today. I also want to thank Aria, without whom none of this would have been possible. She has been just so on it, and thank you, Aria, for all your hard work. And I also want to welcome, we have a big audience online, so welcome to you as well. So I'll begin by thanking, I already did, my extraordinary collaborators, without whose contributions our series would be much diminished, and by acknowledging our generous sponsors. So the Initiative for Race and Resilience, directed by Dr. Mark Sanders, in which our series is housed. So we were pretty homeless in the institution before that, so thank you for putting a roof over our heads. And thank you to the Institute for Social Concerns, the Liu Institute for Asia and Asian Studies, the MFA program in Creative Writing, the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, the Graduate School, and most importantly, the Dean of the College of Arts and Letters, Sarah Mustillo, who is the primary funder of this series. So this is our first in-person event, and I'm very grateful to Palestinian writer and Sue Kaufman and Aspen Ward Literature Prize winner Isabella Hammad. This is a short list of these authors' awards. Cherokee Nation author and National Book Award finalist and Guggenheim winner Brandon Hobson, and the critically acclaimed Iranian fiction writer and journalist Amir Ahmadi Arian for accepting my invitation. For those of you who are new to us, the series brings together Middle Eastern and North African writers, both migrants and those situated in the region, with minoritized American writers. The larger aim of the series is to examine how writers innovate the technology of the novel in the process of responding to systemic violence. What we are asking is, how do writers transfer into language the grammar of experiences so abhorrent that they exist beyond the limits of speech? Each of the writers present with us today navigates the haunting silence of catastrophe, both by respecting its limits through a willful resistance toward epiphany and facile closure, and by challenging the boundaries of history, its illusory realism and flattening singularity. This generative tension in their work has the effect of transforming our manner of thinking and seeing, particularly with regard to contested histories and the literatures of stateless nations. Arian's Then the Fish Swallowed Him, Hammad's Enter Ghost, and Hobson's The Removed are boldly told novels that embody the notion put forward by Arundhati Roy that the very form of the novel gives a writer the freedom to be as complicated as she wants, to move through worlds, languages, and time, through societies, communities, and politics. A novel, she writes, is freedom with responsibility. In Arian's novel, Then the Fish Swallowed Him, we are immersed in the life of Yunus, a largely silent character. The novel takes us from the time of Reza Shah Pahlavi through the 1979 Islamic Revolution and to the Green Movement of 2009. Time is both a panoramic canvas and a dilated, unmoving present. After participating in a bus drivers' union protest that the state violently interrupts, Yunus, struggling to metabolize the spectral violence of the protest, attacks one of his passengers and is promptly arrested, blindfolded, and taken to Evin. In Evin, Tehran's main prison, dissidents and ordinary citizens are arbitrarily interrogated, severely tortured, and executed. It is, I believe, a genocidal infrastructure, an archive of fabricated confessions and false disfiguring evidence where the language of the prisoner, recorded under conditions of surveillance, is weaponized against their captive body. Arian writes, "It took me less than a day to learn that Evin was a time warp. It manipulated the order of your memories, messed with your conception of the relation between events." I'd like to pause here for a moment to deliver a brief history of the word genocide, since strategic and premeditated crimes against humanity inform the wider context of all three novels we are here to discuss. The word genocide is made from the Greek word genos and the Latin kide, killing. It was formulated by Polish Jewish legal scholar Raphael Lemkin in 1933. I cite our colleague, genocide scholar Ernesto Verdeja. The UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide owes its existence to Lemkin, but misses many of his careful sociological insights about the nature of genocide. Lemkin sketched a law banning barbarity and vandalism. Barbarity he defined as the premeditated destruction of national, racial, religious, and social collectivities, which included acts of extermination directed against ethnic, religious, or social collectivities, whatever the motive. Also belonging in these categories are all sorts of brutalities which attack the dignity of the individual, in cases where these acts of humiliation have their source in a campaign of extermination directed against the collectivity in which the victim is a member. Vandalism referred to the systematic and organized destruction of the art and cultural heritage in which the unique genius and achievement of a collectivity are revealed in fields of science, arts, and literature. Returning to the subject of Eunice's fate, I'd like to note that Evin prison is at times referred to as a university because of the number of dissidents that have spent time in solitary confinement there, a joke of the darkest order that has the effect of flipping my stomach, because it exposes a truth that thinking itself, the very matter from which art, science, and literature arise, is forbidden in Iran. Instead, what is privileged is silence, and blinding deference to an arbitrary judicial system that infringes on human rights, on the right to think and to speak. If we transfer our attention to the reality of North America, silence once again obfuscates our vision of history. In The Rediscovery of America, Ned Blackhawk asks, how can a nation founded on the homelands of dispossessed indigenous peoples be the world's most exemplary democracy? This question haunts America as it does other settler nations. Among historians, silence rather than engagement has been the most common response, he writes. Hobson's The Removed is a polyphonic novel narrated by various members of the Akota family in the aftermath of the death of Ray Ray, the youngest son, who was killed in a police shooting. The Akota family is left having to constantly re-narrativize their relationship to the past and to their grief in order to re-envision, to see, think, and speak of an imagined future where history is redressed and justice might be glimpsed. Justice in the novel is approached through chapters narrated by Chala, who encompasses all time and no time, all speech and all silence. Chala is boundless, plural, multi-dimensional. Time among the dead is mysterious. We, Chala speaks, are the ones watching from underwater, rising up like mist, spreading like a rainstorm. Narrative time becomes an arrow that moves in multiple directions, even as we progress through the 7 days preceding an annual bonfire that the Akota family holds as a sacred ritual for remembering Ray Ray. We weave in and out of the present, descend into the darkening lands where Edgar, Ray Ray's brother, inhabits a purgatory that doubles as historical allegory, and ascend through time into the realm of oral history from which Chala's voice speaks. In Enter Ghost, our protagonist, Sonia, continually asks her father and sister, why doesn't anyone in this family tell me anything? She is enveloped in both familial and historical silence. A London theater actress, reeling from the end of a difficult romantic relationship, she embarks on a troubled journey home to Haifa, inside the 48 territories, to various points in the occupied West Bank, where, as she navigates notions of allegiance and belonging, she is drawn into a staging of Hamlet that unfolds under the surveillance of the Israeli state. She is haunted by the words of her grandmother recorded in 1944. Even if I cannot live in it, my soul will reawaken if there is a Palestinian state. As the novel proceeds, the line between Sonia, the character, and Gertrude, her role in Hamlet, is blurred. It is this blurring of the line that leads to a political awakening and gives expression to a rage long suppressed, and which now floats up to the surface of consciousness, rearranging in its wake Sonia's understanding of self, nation, and the ghosts of history. This superimposition of narrative discourse, the lines of the character Sonia and the actress Gertrude, shed light on the contested nature of history and ultimately exposes the fact that the safety of a people cannot, by its very definition, rely on the unsafety of their supposed enemy, a fact which importance I cannot overstate as we continue to remain immersed in an ongoing Nakba. In his monumental book, In the Presence of Absence, Mahmoud Darwish writes that a second life, promised by language, continues. These novels are a second life and a generative haunting. We cannot underestimate the importance of coming together as writers who are mobilizing counter-histories across coalitions and who are dispersed across various exiles and who are, in the words of my collaborator Francisco Robles, speaking with and alongside one another. It is my distinct privilege to be in conversation with you today. I'll leave you with another line from the Palestinian poet and author Mahmoud Darwish. A journalist asks him, "What are you writing in this war, poet?" And Darwish replies, "I am writing my silence." So our authors will each read for a couple of minutes and then we'll launch into discussion. Whoever wants to start. You have your book open. You want to go for it, Amir?
Is it working? Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out this evening. Thank you, Azareen and Mark and everybody at English Department at Notre for inviting us here. I'm very honored to be here tonight. Yeah, it's great to be among you. So I'm gonna just read a couple of pages from the end of the first chapter. I'm in denial of my age, so I forgot to bring my reading glasses. So just if I stumbled or missed something, apologies in advance. So this is the book opens in the bus terminal in west of Tehran, and the bus drivers have put on strike. They're on strike, and so the police comes in to break the strike, and it gets violent. And the protagonist of the novel, the guy, bus driver named Yunus, he's kind of involved, he gets thrown into the fight, and at some point is hit by an electric baton. So this is after he's struck. From the ground, I watched the darting silhouettes around me. Footwear of all kinds stepped into view in front of my face. Sneakers, military boots, worn-out Melli shoes, dirty leather sandals. Some men came very near to me as they stumbled, jumped, and kicked. I sensed that they made contact with me, but heard no sound and experienced no pain. My ears shut themselves to the outside world, yet I could hear the squeals of my muscles and bones pleading for help. The paralysis receded slowly. I couldn't tell how much time had passed, but finally I turned to my side and got up. I staggered, pressing through flailing bodies across the asphalt to one of the buses, where I sat on the bumper and held my knees. The pandemonium moved over me like a floating pall. I picked at the fight from behind the bus, knowing that I couldn't be a part of it anymore. The baton had sucked my body empty. I gathered myself and stepped onto the bumper so I could use the handle of the engine hatch to haul myself up. My other foot found the top of the tail light. From this position, I stretched and grabbed the edge of the roof, and with a last burst of strength, heaved myself onto the top of the bus. I lay face up, dizzy, lungs on fire. The clouds drifted above, softly colliding and merging, sometimes passing briefly over the sun. The sky called me. I rolled over to observe the metal roof. I had spent my whole adult life at the wheel, always a couple of feet beneath this surface, and I had never seen the roof up close. My hand trailed across the warm, smooth metal. I put my face on it, closed my eyes, and let its heat soothe me like a baby laying his head on his mother's bosom. So thank you. I just stopped here.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to read just a couple of pages from the removed, from a section from Chala, who is a spirit ancestor. And he's talking to his son. He's telling traditional stories to his son, and about the violence against them. Look to the sky, and there we are, soaring like hawks, circling in the air. We are the birds appearing like a string of red berries against the clouds. We are all around, the deities to cover every expansive body of land. We are bathed in rainwater flying together. We are a sparkle of blue light inside rocks, the swift rising of smoke and dust forming the hazy outlines of bodies. We are the speakers of the dead, the drifters and messengers, the old and the young, lurking in the shadows of tall trees at night, passing through the walls of abandoned buildings and houses, concrete structures, stone walls and bridges. We are the ones watching from underwater, rising up like mist, spreading like a rainstorm over fields and gardens and courtyards, flying over towers and rooftops and through the arched doorways of old buildings with spider cracks in their walls. We reveal ourselves to those who will look. It has been said we are illusions, nightmares, and dreams, the disturbing, intense apparitions of the mind. We are always restless, carrying the dreams of the children and the elderly, the tired and sick, the poor, the wounded, the removed. In 1838, the firing squad killed you before they killed me. Your mother adorned us in gold and jewelry and buried us. You must know that adornment is as important in death as in life, so they made it known that we were beautiful, even absent of our spirits. An elder had once taught me not to be afraid of death, because there is no death. There is only a change of worlds. I refused to migrate west on the trail, and that's why we died. I refused because it was not fair treatment, and I was willing to sacrifice my life for you, our family, our people. Yes, I know an old man has a mouth full of thunder, so does an old spirit. Before you were born, I helped Dragging Canoe and his son take the fleshy side of enemy scalps and paint them red and tie them to poles for the scalp dances. We imitated the Europeans who invaded us by dancing a foolish, awkward stomp to show their clumsiness. More importantly, the dance healed us by weakening the other races who were responsible for harm or sickness. It was also used to heal the sick for our own people. At one of these dances, I met a man named Dasi Giagi, whose war medicine was a Uktena's shedded skin and burned turtle shell, which he used to smear on his face and body for protection from enemies. He had never been wounded because of wearing this war medicine, as strong as yellow root. He warned me of the seventh hell we were living in, and soon I had dreams of the blood and destruction. Dragging Canoe told me, "You will be a visionary with prophetic gifts. You must learn to understand this." I'll stop there.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. I'm going to read quite a ways through the novel. So the protagonist's name is Sonia, as you may know, some of you. And at this point, the cast have gone to see the set for the play Hamlet, which has been put up in Bethlehem next to the wall. And the other thing you need to know is that Hamlet is being played by a pop singer called Wael, who has no acting experience. And Mariam is the name of the director. Just going to switch mics with you. There we go. Is that better?
Is that better?
Yeah? Okay. Strange, I can't hear anything, but
I
as long
can't. People can't.
Hello, hello.
Oh,
There we go. Okay. Okay. Wael was telling Janan for the third time that she ought to go to a nunnery, idhabi ila dar rahibat, when a voice shouted, "Sorry I'm late." Everyone turned at once. The lanky figure of Majid was running towards us wearing an Adidas tracksuit and yellow-framed spectacles, lifting dust with his sneakers. I got an interrogation order. He was out of breath, wiping his lenses on his T-shirt. My wife made me go back for it. She freaked out. Police in the house. "Hi, everyone," he added as he put his glasses back on and did a double take. Who were all these people? "Open rehearsal." Mariam hesitated before switching to English and lowering her voice. What's it for, did they say? Majid handed her a folded page. I had an odd thought that Mariam could have spoken in Hebrew, since this was a tourist town and everyone understood English, but of course the sound of Hebrew would not be well received this side of the wall. Mariam read the interrogation order, which was itself, I now saw, entirely in Hebrew, met my eye, and then met Ibrahim's. Do you think they know your brother's still involved? Said Ibrahim. Mariam blew her cheeks out. How? Said Wa'il. Talk about it later, said Mariam. Finish the scene first, guys. Jenan and Wa'il returned to their positions to complete the dialogue. Both looked rattled, particularly Jenan, which was understandable. She'd just joined us, she was feeling out our dynamic, and now not only was a new dynamic hatching, but a threat had materialized, of interrogation, of danger, of disillusion even. As far as I was concerned, if the Israelis really made an effort to stop us, it would not be worth the fight. We were mere human beings, there was only so much we could do. The only person who didn't look unnerved was Mariam, who stared at her actors as though with the force of her gaze she could make them more sturdy. I had a feeling I sometimes get when I drink too much coffee, which was that while standing still, watching Jenan and Wa'il, another more agitated Sonia was wriggling inside my skin trying to get out. I was thirsty as well and I needed the loo, and in this state of physical discomfort something strange happened. My viewpoint switched. And as though I were in a dream and my perspective had been breached, I moved like a surveillance drone and saw our project from above, situated fragilely in time and place, this summer, this side of the wall. Accompanying this vision was a fear, almost a premonition, that it was all foretold that anyway. Everything had been decided in advance. We were only acting parts that had been given to us, and now some inexorable machinery was being set in motion that would sooner or later throw our efforts out into the audience, dismantle our illusions, and leave us cowering before the faceless gods of fate and state. God, it's weird to read that now. I walked a few paces over to the angled shade cast by the set and its scaffolding. Moving there heartened me. I looked up at our tall wooden stage, which had been drawn on paper and brought to life. It was strong, it would withstand the rain, it was a monument, a work, like the giant key at the refugee camp, which had probably been praised by some critic at some tent at the Biennale. It was terrible to take heart in the thought that a monument was less likely to be bulldozed than an ordinary person's home. But no sooner had I thought this than I doubted it was true. I doubted the power of what Mariam called PR, whether being photographed many times, appearing in a newspaper, could ever really protect a building or a human life when it came down to it. Valiantly, Wa'il and Jenan were carrying on, and then Jenan was completing her final speech, saying of Wa'il, I see now that refined and noble intellect ringing as sweet bells jangle discordantly, detestably, and after the silence that signified the end of scene came the sudden fracturing of applause, and our crowd became restless, homing in on Wa'il, calling his name. Mariam announced a 10-minute break, and then we'll run the fencing scene and then we're going home. And I watched her sit beside Jenan, making wheel-like hand gestures, taking the script from her and licking her fingers to flick it back a few pages. I dreamt about you last night, said a voice. It was Amin, beside me, rolling a smoke. Really? What was I doing? I couldn't keep the edge out of my tone. His friendliness unnerved me. Trying to remember. He ran the sticky margin of his paper over his tongue. It wasn't about you, the dream. Don't be scared. I just made an appearance. Exactly. Minor character. Right. On the stage steps, Wa'il held his jacket rakishly over one shoulder while strangers crowded around him. He leaned in for each selfie. His white smile flashed and shut, flashed and shut. He looked much more comfortable being famous than being Hamlet.
Thank you. Is this working? Yeah, great. So I was going to begin with a question on silence, but I think I'll circle back to that and start with a slightly unusual question, which there's scenes in which the characters are naked in all three novels. And I'm thinking about, you know, that language you just used about the breach of perspective, the breach of consciousness. And the scenes I'm thinking of are in the opening of Isabella Hammad's book, when there's an interrogation in the airport in Tel Aviv, and this is the first re-entry. And then there's a bathtub scene later in the novel in which she confronts her sister Haneen about a very important historical moment in their personal lives when they had gone as when they were younger to Bethlehem with their uncle to visit and see a young boy in the family who was on a hunger strike. And the two sisters have different recollections of the event, and they also have since followed up on the event in very different ways. And then there's the scene in Aveen prison when Eunice is stripped and very violently searched. And there's a couple of scenes, one where Sonia is in the backyard of her, I guess for lack of a better word, I'll call her lover, Vin. That scene felt very transformative. And then Ray's brother, Edgar, is in the bathtub and at a different point in the novel. So all these just moments where the characters are really stripped down. I wonder if you could speak to them in any way.
I'm going first? Okay. It's a hard question. I think it's a very interesting question. I guess I can sort of say the things that come to mind. Like, it's hard to think about nakedness right now with respect to Palestine without these images that are burned on my retina of people who've been stripped and blindfolded. And I think the relationship between clothing and dignity and the ways in which the state impinges on people's bodies, that kind of, which obviously then speaks to the experiences of being incarcerated, right? And control of the body. When you're incarcerated, for example, the body is one of the few things you can control. That's the nature of the hunger strike. It's that I spend a lot of time thinking about what it means to go on hunger strike, and it's about even though it seems to have a paradox at the heart of it, you go on hunger strike and you're threatening your life, and then the carceral system intervenes to protect your life. So it seems to have a paradox at the heart of it, but it's actually about kind of territorial control, that it's the only thing you can control is what enters and what exits. That's it. Everything else is out of your hands. So it becomes this kind of assertion of sovereignty to have control over the body in that way. And I find that kind of very important, a kind of key for thinking about the Palestinian struggle and the Palestinian experience, and specifically the experience of prisoners. Like, I think the prisoners movement is something that, I can't remember the latest figures, but since the beginning of the genocide, it was like it was 5,000 or 6,000 in Israeli prisons, and now it's more than doubled. And we can think of Gaza as a kind of prison as well. So the kind of carceral system is very much embedded in the framework of the Israeli apartheid and the genocide. So that's, I think, what comes to mind when I think about the body. Obviously, when it comes to Sonia, who's this sort of privileged, slightly self-centered actress who's confronting her sister, or sort of coming to her sister, who's in kind of loco maternis. She's kind of like her mother, and she's coming to her sister with her guilt and her pain, as she wants her sister to fix it. So Sonia's experience of nakedness is a little bit, it's a bit different. It's a bit more about returning to the family, but she constantly coming up against the structure of the state at the same time. So I think when I was reading that passage about them putting on this play and being like, what's the point if the Israelis are gonna fuck it up, they're gonna destroy it, then what's the point with just like a bunch of actors with a set? There's something in there. It was a bit uncanny to read it, because if you think about the nature of resistance of all sorts against Israeli infrastructure, that kind of applies. It's like, well, what's the point? We just have our bodies. They're gonna kill us. What's the point of fighting? But then you do anyway.
Yeah, there's the line that like Uncle Jad says to Haneen, "Our bodies are our only battleground," and it's really powerful.
Yeah, I think, and I have a Sonia in my book as well, who's a sister, and I think there's a scene where she walks outside and she's naked, and there's a lot. I was trying to do a lot also with weather in this book, and how I mentioned this earlier this morning, but how the earth reacts to the way that we treat it. In much the way that people react in terms of trauma. And so I wanted that moment especially to be, some sort of vulnerability almost, like she's just walking out into in the rain, and the wind is coming up, and it just felt like a good place for her, to just sort of walk outside and sort of, this tempestuous weather that's happening. How does she's dealing with her trauma in much the same way from losing her brother. Which is a little different than, I think, the other scene in the bathtub with Edgar is, it's been a while. I think he's just high, I think, in that scene.
Well, he puts on Ray Ray's sunglasses, and then he
That's
sort of
right.
sees the ancestors.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, thank you for reminding me. I'm sorry, I've finished another book since then, so it's
Of course, I understand.
I mean all those a lot of those scenes are sort of how do they connect with the brother who was taken from them through police violence, and how can they connect right with them? And so that I think that was part of it, was wearing his brother's sunglasses and
Yeah, when you put it that way, it's so interesting, because like when you think about nakedness, like you really share that experience with your siblings really profoundly when you're young, right? In this like state of innocence, if we're lucky enough to have a state of innocence as children, but and that would be the way in which they're all reconnecting. I mean, it's an half-baked thought, but Amir.
Yeah, when I was researching this novel, I talked to quite a few people who spent time in evidence solitary confinement. I remember asked one of them, what did you miss the most in solitary confinement? He said, my solitude. So I thought about that a lot afterwards, that it sounds like a kind of a contradiction. You're in solitary confinement, you're alone all the time. But the purpose of the solitary confinement actually is not to leave you alone, is to kind of clear the space around you, around your body and on your body, so that the state can take over all of that state, all of that space, occupy that whole space. And so when you're in that cell for a long time, you're desperate for a second of not feeling the presence of the state on your skin. So the sin that you mentioned in the beginning of the book, when it's like this bureaucratic process of entering into the prison. So at one point they strip. I mean, they do it to everyone, but in the book they strip him down, all his clothes, and very sort of violently start sort of patting him and touching him, and his genitalia and everywhere, and really kind of harass him. That's kind of establishing that message in my mind, that from now on I'm attaching something to your skin, right? It's almost like a chip that we plant underneath your skin, and as you walk out of here, as long as you're in this prison, you're not gonna have a moment of feeling alone, right? Feeling kind of left alone. And so there are other scenes in the novel later when the character is naked. I think both of them are in the shower. Maybe there's more, I forget now. And in both cases, when he takes a shower, he is kind of using this very rough sponge to clean himself, and he does it so hard and so long until he bleeds. So it is as if he's kind of trying to remove something off his skin without really knowing that, that presence that he feels all the time on his body in the cell, the intrusion of state and the takeover of the state of his life and his body, as if in the shower it's like a symbolic act, not really symbolic. Literally, he's trying to remove something off of his skin unsuccessfully, because as soon as he leaves the shower and goes back to the cell, the state is there.
Yeah, thank you. I think maybe we can talk a little bit about technology next. So Amir, there's the technology of, well, there's the transcripts, but then there's like voice and video recordings that Eunice is forced to watch, and they're recordings of people that he's known, right? And that he's betrayed, but in the video they're also betraying him. But there's no, Anyway, I'll let Amir speak to those, and then And then there is the sort of when he finally does emerge from prison 4 years later, there's the scene of the selfie, right, in the park. And Isabella, the tape recording of Sonia and Haneen's grandmother's voice. And the stage set is a kind of technology as well. And then in Brandon's, the Darkening Land sections that I was talking about, which are really powerful, there's a video game hologram. So maybe we could just leave it open-ended.
Yeah. So the Darkening Land, by the way, is this sort of mythological place from the traditional folklore in Cherokee. It's a place where that's where souls go after they die as a sort of purgatory, and until justice is served, then return. And but in any of the old folklore, the traditional stories, there's never any description of this place. So as I was incorporating folklore in this novel, that was one of the things I really enjoyed writing was I could make the Darkening Land out of my own sort of imagination, right? And but it becomes this place of fear, really, for the brother of the boy who was shot by the police. He's living in fear in that he's going to be shot also. He's going to die in the same way. And so in the Darkening Land, that he finds himself there in this sort of futuristic, he's the object in a video game. And he has to sort of at first he just lets the guy sort of film him, and then slowly he begins to realize that he's sort of being mocked and the object of a shooting game, and so it was. I was thinking a lot about gaming and how because I have two kids, whether that is at the time, I know especially like if that was kind of invoking any fear in them. Just in terms of violence in games, and so the scene in the Darkening Land, which is again this sort of just very strange place that I wanted Edgar to really fear the entire time that he is going to die in the same way that his brother was by shooting, and he begins to be the object, and so that becomes really the part of those sections is him just sort of running from that. Yeah.
Am I going next? Technology. Yeah, I mean, when I think of technology, actually, with this novel, I think about their phones, them interacting with their phones, and how much the new, they're getting the news to their phones. And Mariam, the director, is always saying, "Get off your phones, guys." It's sort of like I think she says this is the antithesis of theatre. It's like it's the opposite of theatre. Theatre is like you're all in a room together. It's like the most live art form. You're interacting with each other in that moment. It's completely unmediated. So when the actors are all hanging out in the audience, reading on their phones, it's kind of like disrupting the whole point of putting on this play. But that she's a kind of she's a very like idealistic character who, she wants to put on this big fancy play. She's chosen Hamlet. It's in classical Arabic. It's very like highfalutin, and at the same time she wants to get a big audience, so she casts this pop star as the main character, even though he can't act. So she's kind of at odds with herself a little bit, and a little bit out of time, because it says, we're in a world of screens. Cinema is the art form that's going to get massive audience, not theatre. But she's sort of like as though it's the 1970s, and she's operating in a different kind of world. But I think that kind of the way in which I guess I use technology in the books is specifically a kind of counterpoint to what the cast are trying to do. They're sort of doing something that's anti-tech. Which obviously speaks to something at large that's happening in that dynamic politically. I mean,
yeah. So this novel is set in 2004, 2005, and those were the early years of the internet, at least in Iran, the early years of the internet. So I'm really fascinated by those early years. That many different directions that this could go, and of course it took the worst direction. So, there's like a scene early in the novel that the guy in the union is telling them, don't put anything in email. We still don't know what email is. We can't trust it yet. So there are all these like nebulous space around, this new technology. They're trying to navigate it. And, many of them are hopeful about it. But then the bigger part of it is the surveillance. That was kind of the main focus of the novel. And, I was interrogated myself in 2010, 11. And so it was a multi-hour, kind of, not in prison. I was not that important. But it was like a multi-hour kind of Q&A with the guy. Sitting across the table. So, a lot of it was like an ideological, really boring stuff about what's going on in the country, what I think about this and that and that. And then gradually change the direction of the conversation towards my sort of personal relationships. This person, what do you have to say about that person, and so on. And at some point I lied about something. I didn't tell the truth. And he produced a printout of my Gmail, an email from my Gmail account. I had no idea they had access to that. I was kind of naively, I thought that it's secure. That was such a hard moment. I mean, I can't really describe how hard it was. I didn't really care about the rest of it, all of that back and forth. You feel like violated all of a sudden, in daylight, by the person sitting like a couple of feet away from you. And that was it. But it was a message that we know everything about you, so yeah, be careful of what you do and what you say in the future. And that moment alone, that he showed me my email, the things that I had written to a certain person, print out of it. This stranger put it in front of me on the table. It really changed everything for me. And I'm really not a brave person, so I did stop after that session. I didn't do much after that and kind of hunkered down. And it's interesting because this is, as I said, 2010, 2011, about the time of the Arab Spring. If you remember, Facebook was taking all the credit for what was happening in the world. They're like the champions of democracy and so on. And in that room, I realized that actually the people who was using Facebook effectively are on the other side. I think it turned out to be the case later in Egypt and elsewhere too. So then in the book, it is part of that experience is kind of translated into Yunus's experience. They show him print out of his text messages, and the interrogator is actually mad at him for not having an email, not having an email account. And so, all of that. So this new technology as the tool for very effective surveillance tool in the hands of the state is something that I think it is, like a no-brainer now. A lot of people know that, but back then, 2010, 11, or earlier, it was a huge shock.
Yeah. Can I add something to that? I really think we, how to say this? We're in a totally new territory now, and I think that does have to do so much with the way we interact with screens, where everything we do on a screen is recorded, and we are the data being sold. And there's kind of like ways in which, because it makes our lives easier, we accept all of these intrusions on our privacy, on our freedom, on our our independence, basically. And I think that's something I'm increasingly conscious of. I mean, I was engaging with it in the novel, but I think especially after COVID, actually, I became very conscious of it in COVID, that they were training whole populations to stay at home for everything to be remote. And you can see it now on the campuses where they've become very militarized after the encampments in the spring. And because everybody's been trained to go remote, at the flick of a switch, they can say everything's remote and you all stay at home. So there's this kind of way in which we've been also trained by the technology. And as you say, it's using us much more than we're using it. And I think that we can also use it as a kind of liberatory tool, but we're not, the ways in which it's structured, the kind of financialization of our data on the internet, we're just giving information all the time, and it's much more in the hands of the state than it is in our hands. And I think that's why with Palestinians, Palestinians have a tendency of being kind of retrospective to keep looking back at the 60s and 70s, which was the high watermark of the Palestinian Revolution, without, and obviously this is not so much the case now, but people still looking at the text at that period for guidance, which is great and important, but there is a huge difference between what we could do in the 70s and what we can do now, and that has a lot to do with technology. So I think sometimes I also feel not to raise the novel as some kind of punching above its weight, but it is a space in which we can be private. There's a sort of privacy in reading a book, which you don't really have on a screen. And I think that the more that we can cultivate those spaces of privacy in our lives, in our mental lives, apart from anything else, like it's psychological, and then it's also social, the way we can actually be in a room together. Like I'm so happy that we're in a room, physically in this room together. That's very special and very important also for our communication with one another. There's communication that you have in a room where you're with bodies in a room that you can't have on a screen. And that was something I was thinking about in this book, but I think about even more now.
Yeah, especially with theater, which is like collaborative, right?
Yeah.
And it demands physicality and presence. Speaking of 2010, I was actually in the West Bank at that time, interviewing. I was very young and perhaps naive, but I was interviewing artists on both sides who were responding to the occupation, and I was publishing some of these pieces on Words Without Borders, and I had visited Ida camp and then sent like a very long email about the camp. And I was on a Fulbright in Girona, Spain, walking down to meet my husband across campus. And I was searching through my emails, and the email had completely vanished. There was no trace left of it. Of anyone who I had sent it to, it was nowhere in my inbox. It was just gone. And I was hysterical. I felt like I had been invaded remotely, and it's probably just like an algorithm, right, that just picked up Ida camp and a refugee or whatever their wards are. So it kind of leads me into, I think, the next question, which is, if we can return to the subject of silence, and silence can be so many things, right? It can be it can be solitude, it can be powerful, it can be regenerative, but there's also like a kind of the privacy that you enter into when you're reading a novel is a kind of contract of silence as well. But then there's the silence of the state, the silencing effects of the state and the ways that it can penetrate not just your skin and your body, but your family dynamics. And I wanted to ask you guys to talk a little bit about the ways that you navigate and employ silence in your novels, like Isabella, the gaps in communication that Sonia struggles through. And Amir, Yunus is a very passive character. He sort of ends up in these situations, including the love affair that he has with Homa. It's just like he ends up, everything's just happening to him. And then Brandon, the silence that Edgar is trapped inside of really twists the entire, like he's like a vortex around which, especially the women in the novel, keep circling, right? And then there's the opposite of silence, which is there's so much music and like records, and then he has tinnitus later, right? So anyway, I just thought it was so fascinating the ways that you guys all definitely dealt with all those qualities of silence.
Yeah, I don't know that I was really thinking so much about silence in this book, but I think in certain situations I was thinking about passivity, right? Like being passive, or maybe stoicism or something. I think, but I do know that the opposite, the noise, and what you talk about. Like Edgar, he has a drug problem, the brother, and so the scenes in which there's fighting with a girlfriend or something. I wanted, they're listening to jazz music really loud and sort of like bebop jazz, right? And that's just that sort of a lot of crashing drums and it seemed to sort of in the midst of argument, the music in that moment, I wanted to just be sort of wild, right? But I don't know that I was thinking so much in terms of doing anything with silence or not consciously. I do know that, in some of the nature stuff especially with Sonia, that being outside, I think I was sort of maybe accessing that a little bit, but I don't know that that was something I was really pushing too much, as much as noise. I think noise was, noise and distraction in some ways. Yeah.
The floor is mine. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I don't have a coherent answer to the use of silence in my book. Maybe it relates to ghostliness in some way, the kind of ghosts. Obviously, it's called Enter Ghost, so that wasn't my initial title, but I was bullied by my agent. It's a fine title. But it is like populated with ghosts and sort of the sense of, you have all these recordings of ghosts of the grandmother and a sense of your forefathers. The story of Hamlet is the haunting of the father who says, "Avenge me." So it's a sort of transgenerational struggle, and that kind of maps onto the Palestinian struggle quite neatly. But Sonia is a very haunted character, and it's populated with ghosts in all sorts of ways. I wasn't trying to make some particular point with it, but I was just playing with that, I guess. There is one section where I use silence. I mean, the novel flips into play form when they're rehearsing mostly. And there's one section where Sonia is just saying her lines and Hamlet doesn't say his, so she's interacting with his silence. That's probably the most pointed use of silence in the novel. So there's lots of blank space on the
one
page.
where there's 2 lines on the page.
Yeah, there's like one line. It just says no more, and it's all blank. Which again, I had to fight the copy editor. He kept trying to change it. So
it was our favorite
battling.
page in class.
I had to CC all his bosses at one point. I'd be like, give me my white space. He said it's much easier for the copy editor if we make it regular and small. I was like, you don't understand.
It's a very important moment.
Yeah, I know, it's exactly so. But anyway, I'm glad I stood my ground there.
There's a sort of a social aspect to that. So Eunice is a teenager, about I think 18, 19 when the revolution happens, and then there's the Iran-Iraq war. So that generation in Iran are extremely traumatized and very quiet for some reason. I've met a lot, obviously, almost my mom's age, well, a little younger. There's a whole generation of people who came into adulthood just as the revolution happened, and then immediately was followed by 8 years of a very sort of bloody and brutal war. And those people, in my experience, they're very quiet, they're very reserved, and it's just hard to sort of kind of penetrate their solitude. No pun intended there. So there is that, but then silence in prison as a political prisoner is a survival strategy too. So the first thing you learn when you get into politics in Iran is that when they arrest you and take you there for interrogation, do not say one word more than what you have to say. So in any question, you have to answer with very few words, as few words as possible, because their job is they kind of repeat the question many times. And if you give different answer to a question, like from here, it might be like 2 weeks before to questioning, but they kind of keep track of that. As soon as you give them different answers to the same question, then they really focus on that, and they stay on that until they kind of get something out of it. It might even be a forced confession, but that's where they start. So that's a part of it too. He's trained a little bit, just sitting at a kind of a little lecture before going to the strike. So he knows that he doesn't follow that all the time. But yeah, that's as a survival strategy. Silence in prison is very important. Not to be talkative if you get into politics in Iran. Yeah.
That makes me think, and I'll ask just one more question, and then I would love to open it to the audience. Also, as a bus driver, right? He's kind of quiet and alone up front, shuttling these passengers across Iran. So my question that I'll end with is about mapping space and the importance of place names in novels. And like Isabella, the novel takes place across such a vast tract of land, and each of them have a different relationship to the state and to the history of the Palestinian struggle. And it's incredible, just like the way that you move these characters from place to place, and we always know exactly where they are and exactly how that space is situated in relation to the state of Israel and to various degrees of occupation and surveillance. And then Yunus spends a lot of his time kind of in prison. He's one of the things that helps him survive is also that he's like, oh, you fools, you think if you blindfold me, you can disorient me. But he knows how to count his steps and remap where he is in space because of his experience as a bus driver. And then Brandon, I found actually the mapping happening of like Kua, Oklahoma, specifically as a Cherokee place, but also just the mapping of the environment being really important. And that'll be my last question. So please, as you're listening, think of yours.
Well, Oklahoma was originally Indian territory, of course, and so there are 39 tribes in Oklahoma, and 200 years ago with Andrew Jackson, the removal, the title refers to the removed of tribes going west, and that was I think in terms of I guess in terms of territory, that's what it was all taking place right there in northeastern Oklahoma. But also the space of like kind of like what you said. I mean, I wanted the ancestor, the spirit ancestor, to sort of exist outside of space and outside of time, and to be able to to be everywhere, sort of. And so it's a nonlinear. It's a very nonlinear, I think, book, and I'm really interested in nonlinear narratives, I think, and the fractured narrative, writing about displacement, removal, being forced out, and all these. I think all these important issues that I wanted to confine to one specific space. So I'm trying to do a lot, I think, within a confined space.
I mean, my characters are all from different areas in historic Palestine, so they all have different IDs and different legal statuses, different protections, and so on. I mean, I made my main characters have the most freedom to move, so that we could move across historic Palestine. And the project of putting on the play is to have all these people with these different ID cards together. But there is nobody from Gaza in the play, which I put in a line at the end that Mariam says, I wish there could have been a Gazan Palestinian in the play. That's kind of me speaking, that I wish I could have put somebody from Gaza in the play. But I didn't feel I felt it was too far-fetched. For it to take place in historic Palestine. But that, I guess the absence is gestured to. But yeah, I mean, part of the point was to actually move around Palestine. That was part of the point of the book. When I did a book event in Ramallah, somebody said to me, "Thank you for taking me to Haifa," which I was kind of moved by.
Yeah, I'm in general very interested in the cartographic in the novel. Because so when if you compare the novel with other art forms like painting or cinema, and when you look at a painting, there's a spatial experience there. You kind of take it in at the whole thing at the same time in the first encounter. Then you go look at the details and kind of break it down. Or the movies as well. They're like image by image. There's the reception of the spatial as well as the linear. But the novel, you read it one word at a time. It almost strictly unfolds in time. So you can't have like a you can kind of capture the whole of a novel in one glance or one move. So then since that's the case, I always think about how you can kind of add the spatial or deal with the spatial in the novel. Can the novel act as a map or be like an act of mapping, act of cartography, not just in content or subject matter, but in form too. But in this case, you have a bus driver. His whole life has been driving this bus around Tehran. I mean, he's a cartographer of sorts, right? He's just traversing this territory all the time. That's his job. It's kind of going around and visiting all these places. So when you put that guy in solitary confinement, you just completely, kind of deny him the ability to move or the opportunity to move. Then his mind kind of starts. Then you have this sort of mental cartography, which he executes in order to make it easier on him in the cell. So he imagines the trip that he would do from like a square north of Tehran to a square far south, and tries to remember every little thing that you would see as a bus driver out the window. So this imaginary cartography, is a sort of replacement for, kind of a daily cartography that was his life. Yeah, makes any sense.
Yeah, I think it's like the height of absurdity at one point when he's taken from solitary to court. He gives directions to his drivers because they're trying to navigate the traffic, and he's like, I can tell you how to get there faster. And then he spends 4 years in jail. So questions, we'll pass the mic around. I can do it. So, yeah, take care. Yeah. Any questions? I can pass the mic around. We're open to all questions that are polite.
Hi. I was wondering, like, what are y'all's like relationship with like hope? I guess like personally, and like maybe how that like informs or like contrasts like how you conceive of hope in your writing. Like I was like interested in like the endings of like all your novels with like like Brandon's novel, like the sort of like hopeful image of like the figure like approaching the bonfire, and then like Amir's book, like despite this like really like tragic ending of like Eunice like becoming like a heroin addict, like the last scene of like feeding birds, and then like the mention of like before of just like birds as like a reminder that like life goes on, and then like in Isabella's book, like the like this like sort of like swerve, I guess, from like this like potentially like hopeful image of like like the soldiers like watching the play, like, but then it's like turned towards violence. So I was wondering like how like what you think of hope personally, and maybe like like if that's like if like a hope, if the hope in your writing is like maybe a response to like your own personal despair, or if like just like the sort of contrast between those two.
I'm not answering a question about hope.
Yeah, I don't know if I meant that to be hopeful. The image at the end of the book, it's more sort of meant to be absurd. And that I have another story with my editor. That novel was not supposed to end there, it had a very different ending. Last two chapters of it changed, which kind of pains me to remember now. I don't really know if I just don't think that there has to be hope in fiction. Like it's not an integral part of writing fiction, and I'm definitely not a optimistic person. let's put it this way. I just don't I don't think in the dichotomy of hopefulness, hopelessness, right? So and because of that, I don't see if there is a hopeful moment in a book, I don't see it as counteracting a form of hopelessness. You know, that sort of dichotomy doesn't quite work for me. I'm really inarticulate right now because I don't really know how to talk about that. But that's definitely, I don't feel an urge to, inject hope into the end of my book, so the reader will walk away feeling better about what I did or about the world. That's definitely not something that I'll take into account.
I mean, I think for me, I think I was thinking more of, in terms of resilience, I think, and as the novel started to end there, and that image, the bonfire image, was the vision that first came with ancestors. And so, I mean, I think if anything, I mean, maybe there's a little bit of hope, but I wasn't trying to do that. I was thinking more along the lines of, this reunification, and we're here together despite everything else, right? And so, the joining of the reunification of family, ancestors, that belief that we remain resilient despite everything that we've gone through. I think that's what I was thinking of a little bit more. But I guess there is some hope, though. But I wasn't consciously writing toward hope, if that makes sense. Yeah. Oh, sure.
Yeah, I just I think it's such a difficult question for all of us, even in this particular historical moment, right? But I think what's interesting is that all three of the books end in encounter, and I don't know that those encounters are necessarily hopeful, but they deepen the ambiguities that propel the texts forward. And so I think about it in terms of I was talking in my introduction, these are not epiphanic novels, right? That's not what's happening. That's not what the point is. But there are novels in which there's these deep moments of encounter that aren't resolved. And I love that sort of all the past, future, and present tense collide. And that's where you're left. And it remains to be seen, right? That the novel, in that regard, gives you as a reader an afterlife, right? That you can sit with the novel for a long time. And it can change in the landscape of your mind as you think about it in a month or next year. And I think some of the best novels do that. So, yeah, I think it's an important question, difficult to answer.
A really deep thank you to all of you. This is so powerful, especially now. Trying to think of a question, having a hard time finding the words, but they'll probably come in 3 weeks, so I'm just gonna try. What's coming up for me is a transcendent body politic. I loved what you said about a novel and theater, and this idea of being the antithesis of tech, and just thinking of the importance of our bodies of culture. And I guess I'm holding a question around who is your audience? When you're writing, who are you writing to and for? I also thank you for Haifa and Ramallah, and just the intimacy in which you name place, because it's transcendent, right? We breathe and exist beyond borders. So thank you, and I don't know how you answer that, but I'm curious about where your hearts are in regards to does transcendent body politic make sense? Where does it go in your hearts?
I'm not sure totally what you mean by transcendent body politic, but it could probably go in a few different directions. I mean, I write in English, so obviously I'm trying to write for everybody in a way, but I'm writing for Palestine, or quite specifically, which means that I feel I have to walk a kind of fine line in the text where I don't want to. I don't like hand holding, and I don't want to. I never want to bore a Palestinian reader for them to feel like, why is this over explaining, which you sometimes get with Anglophone Palestinian literature. It's a bit like, and this is a da, 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 you know. But to kind of have a balance. So then there are kind of jokes the Palestinians will get, and then there are or Arabs maybe more generally, and I think that's a kind of interesting thing. It's like almost becomes like a craft issue. It's like a technical thing where I'm walking a line and thinking about degrees of opacity and clarity for different audiences. And then also dealing with my multiple literary heritages, you know, and engaging with them in ways that are creative, mixing them, subverting them, and so on. So that's there very much. And something that I guess I think about and I'm concerned with in terms of readership. But I mean, what do you guys? How do you feel?
Yeah, I don't think much about that. I think the ideal reader probably for me is someone that I never expected to read my book. I'll, you know, that's the person I would love to meet. There are certain, you know, like there's an industry there. So when they publish a book, they have a sense of the audience. You know, they market it to a certain audience. So there's like a, you know, literary fiction published by an Iranian immigrant. They will think maybe they're like, those people in Brooklyn might read it, and there's like Iranians in Bay Area. So they have this, you know, they have their own calculations, and that, you know, a lot of it is probably true. But I really, the person, you know, the ideal reader for me is someone who's not in those calculations. Nobody has counted on them to read a book by like an Iranian immigrant writing in English. You know, yeah, that would be great to have. That kind of audience would be great to have. The audience you don't expect to have. But no, I don't really write towards anyone. I don't have that notion when I write.
You know, Toni Morrison said, write the book that you want to read, and I think that's what I've always tried to do. So in a way, I guess maybe I'm writing for myself, and or thinking about myself. I'm not. The problem with me is that if I start thinking too much about a readership, it sort of paralyzes me. I can't write much. You know, so I try to follow Toni Morrison's advice. You know, what's the structure of the book? What would I find the most? You know, the best novel, and so I don't know. I think thinking about myself, you know, I think, you know, we create art. I paint and I also draw a lot, and I'm not that great, but I just do it entirely for myself. And I feel like I have to do it. I think that's how we are as writers. I mean, we just, you know, it's just something that we feel like we have to do. Yeah.
I'll take advantage of this because I think the question of language kind of it came up. So I just want to read this quote that I didn't have time to read before. Another quote by Arundhati Roy. She says, "I fell into wondering what my mother tongue actually was. What is the politically correct, culturally apposite, and morally appropriate language in which I ought to think and write. What is it like to write in English?" So I just thought it was relevant. I think we have another question.
I have a question specifically for Amir, but I want to thank all three of you and Azareen for organizing this. It's been excellent. Amir, you responded just a moment ago about the absurd and the role of absurdity in your novel. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about a relationship, if any, you see between kind of the political effect of a novel about torture, about solitary confinement, and the role of absurdity in revealing the nature of that, the absurdity and violence of that kind of bureaucratic violence. Or, like, I wouldn't say trivialization because that's not how the novel works, but I feel like absurdity is a really rich category to talk about politics. So I was wondering if you could say more on that.
Yeah, I mean, it is like a very Kafkaesque novel, and the Kafkaesque situation always is kind of imbued with the absurd. The Farsi equivalent of absurd is pooch, which literally means empty, right? So the process of, you know, interrogation is about emptying you out, right? So you're there as a container of some information. You know, and the job of the interrogator is to just draw this out of you violently. So that emptying, I literally just came up with that. So but I've got to think about that. Got to think about it a little more. But so the relationship between that evacuation of the subject of interrogation and the absurd, which like verbally, the word is the same for both of them. That's also interesting. But in like a general sense of the word, you have Kafka has kind of established that a long time ago. How in those situations, meaning just falters. It's impossible to kind of put the elements of that situation together and make sense of them, right? And that becomes the world of the story.
Any other questions? Well, his interrogator constantly kind of justifies what he's doing by saying, "I'm going to clean you out, right? I'm here to clean you. I'm doing you a favor. I'm purifying you." It's so fascinating.
I'll think more about it.
No, fascinating. Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, we have a reception. There's food. Please stay, celebrate with us, and we have books for sale, most importantly, and our writers are happy to sign copies. So please make sure to get your copy signed or buy a copy and get it signed. We'll be here for a little bit with you, and thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our online audience as well.